Thanks again, Congressman. We really appreciate that, and we appreciate you. Behind the scenes all year at RAA and at all the other Washington trade associations, a lot of quiet work is done that advances the safety of the entire aviation system. This work takes place through RAA's own Safety Council, or more broadly, through many of the industry-wide programs that RAA participates in alongside our counterparts. We've asked some of those industry's safety leaders to join us today to talk about some of those programs in place to keep aviation safe and always seeking to get safer. To lead our next panel, it's my pleasure to introduce Julie Schell, who's chairperson of RAA's Safety Council. Julie is the Vice President of Safety and Regulatory Compliance at Piedmont Airlines. She joined Piedmont in 2013 and has served in this role for the past 8 years. Julie began her aviation career over 20 years ago when she received her master's in aviation safety from Embry-Riddle and earned her pilot certificate. After working at Allegheny Airlines in safety and operation management positions, she transitioned to the FAA, where she served as an aviation safety analyst with the FAA National Aviation Safety Data Analysis Center before transitioning to the FAA Whistleblower Protection Program. In an industry and business where safety is everything, the work that Julie and her colleagues do through the Safety Council all year is invaluable. We appreciate it. Julie will now take the stage to introduce our next prestigious panel and moderate a lively discussion. Please join me in welcoming Julie and our panelists.
Thank you, Faye. Thank you for the nice introduction. All right, good morning, everybody. I am so excited to be leading this panel today of aviation safety experts. I'll start off with introductions, starting with Peggy Gilligan. Peggy has served in many positions in her 37-year career at the FAA. Most recently, she served as the Associate Administrator of Aviation Safety until she retired in 2017. While she was the Associate Administrator for Aviation Safety, she served as a government co-chair of 2 government industry groups committed to improving aviation safety and by reducing the risk of accidents. Those include the Aviation Safety Information Sharing and Analysis, or ASIAS, and the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, or CAST. Both of these were recognized for developing an integrated and data-driven strategy that reduced aviation accident risk by 83% over 10 years. Currently, Peggy serves as the Board of Governors for the Flight Safety Foundation, the Board of Directors for the Laura Tabor Barber Air Safety Foundation, and Aura Network Systems. Welcome, Peggy.
Thank you, Julie.
Next is Michael Quiello. Michael is the Vice President of Corporate Safety, Security, and Operation Excellence at Avelo Airlines. He started at Avelo in December of 2020. Prior to that, he served as the Vice President of Corporate Safety at United Airlines, as well as the Vice President of Corporate Safety, Security, and Compliance at Delta. Michael began his aviation career when he started flying and received his pilot certificate at the age of 17. After graduating from college, he was commissioned as an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps and was designated a naval aviator after completing the U.S. Navy Flight School. Michael is a member of various professional organizations and has served on a variety of industry committees, including Airlines for America Safety Council, IATA International Operations Committee, Flight Safety Foundation Board of Governors, and most recently, while Michael was at United, he was the industry co-chair of the ASIAS Executive Board and industry co-chair of CAST. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Nobuyo Reinsch, our very own RAA Vice President of Aviation Safety and Security when she started the role in 2019. Nobuyo provides subject matter expertise on issues related to safety and security and representing 16 North American regional carriers. She represents the carriers in various industry and government working groups such as CAST and ASIAS, and she also serves as a member of the agency advisory committees, including the Aviation Safety Advisory Committee, Aviation Security Advisory Committee. Welcome, Nobuyo.
Thank you.
All right, let's get started. Peggy, while you were serving as the Associate Administrator of Aviation Safety evolved significantly during your tenure, including SIS, CAS, and SMS rulemaking. You were one of the key players in advancing aviation safety, but I'm sure it wasn't a straightforward or easy path. Could you share with us some of the challenge that you and the FAA went through during that time? At the time, they were cutting edge programs and the policies that were implemented.
Sure, thanks, Julie. Yeah, I'd like to give a quick little history lesson. 25 years ago, this industry suffered two catastrophic failures: ValueJet off Miami into the Everglades, and TWA 800 off JFK into the Long Island Sound. At that time, there were broad questions being asked about the commitment of this industry to safety and the relevance of FAA in setting safety standards. Those questions were followed by a White House commission and a congressional inquiry that came up with many recommendations, but two that were fundamental back at that time. The first, from the White House Commission, said that this industry should accomplish a 5-fold reduction in accidents in 10 years. Now, despite those two catastrophic failures, we actually had quite a good safety record. The recommendation from the congressional review was that the industry should come together, that's industry and government, and set a coordinated agenda to enhance safety. And those two recommendations together really set the stage for the many programs, Julie, that you mentioned and what we've been able to accomplish. So back in 1997, this industry and FAA and NASA and others came together and created the Commercial Aviation Safety Team, which was dedicated to accomplishing the 5-fold reduction in accidents in 10 years. Not that any of us thought we could do it, but we knew we were under great scrutiny. We had to make that commitment. And that started us again down this path that said, we've got to work together, but now we had to figure out how to do it. And at that point, there wasn't a lot of trust between industry and government, between management and labor, between manufacturers and operators. So it's not only that we didn't trust each other, in some cases we didn't even like each other very much, but we had to come together and figure a way to start to address this public perception that as an industry, we were not committed to protecting those people who we were carrying. And so we started down that path, and that was probably the biggest challenge of all. In the first couple of years, we began to build that trust. We began to really see each other as safety professionals. We also agreed that this was not going to be a case where people would tell FAA what they wanted and wait for us to do rules, or where manufacturers would say, well, if only you would purchase this, you could enhance your safety. This was a case where we would come together, look at the data, identify safety enhancements, and make commitments for what we could do. What could FAA do? What could an operator do? What could the manufacturers do? And then we would hold each other accountable to actually do those things. It sounds easy, having said it, but you can imagine how hard that was. We actually started, when we first started, we had what we called the process police, because at every meeting, it would all fall apart and we'd all end up speaking loud and exchanging meaningful ideas until somebody would say, stop, go back, think about what we're here to do and what we have to accomplish within 10 years. And slowly we began to build the trust and then the capabilities to actually make those commitments. Then we have 9/11, 2001. The industry suddenly is losing money, not suddenly, but the industry is losing substantial money. That would be the kind of thing that normally would have broken these kinds of efforts. And instead, we pulled together even more strongly to say, okay, given these new financial limitations, what can we continue to do? What will you commit to? Operators, labor, manufacturers, FAA, what can we commit to continue to enhance safety? Along came new technologies, the ability to collect and analyze huge amounts of data, which started to reduce some of the costs of what we were doing. And all of it we were able to really accomplish all of it because we finally began to realize that we do trust each other, we can trust each other, and we're all in this together. So those were the early challenges that I think to a large extent we've overcome.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peggy. Michael, you've played Part 119 safety roles at all of your carriers. From an operator's perspective, could you talk about some of the challenges that you faced in instituting these safety programs?
Sure. Thank you. That's a great question. One data point was that you always just like to talk about. If we had the same accident rate today that we had in 1996 and 7, we'd lose an aircraft every 3 weeks in the United States. That's an amazing, amazing statistic that Peggy always used to bring forward to talk about the work of ASICE and CAS. The challenges I had were enormous because as Peggy was talking about change management at the FAA, we had to do change management within the company itself. And there were leaders that did not believe in the just culture. And there are leaders who do not believe in SMS. They believe in financial management systems, they believe in marketing management systems, but a safety management system, that was kind of out there. And so when you talk about change management, it was getting the leaders to believe that this is in everybody's best interest. And so how I used to do it was to quantify safety. And you say, well, how can you quantify an intangible, something that didn't happen? Well, I used to quantify what did happen. I can tell you each injury was $20,000 OSHA, 52,000 lost time injury. $100,000 on aircraft damage, out of service time for aircraft damage, people out of work every day due to workers' comp. And when you start quantifying safety, all of a sudden, people start to sit up. And they say, well, you're telling me I have 2 aircraft out of service every day because of aircraft damages? Yeah, and that should be generating $100,000 of revenue. Meanwhile, it's sitting in the barn. It's like having an extra car in your garage because your kids don't know how to drive, because there's always a car in the shop. And so when you start quantifying safety, you started to get a better understanding. So you get the top level of managers to understand the safety management system. But where the rubber meets the road is on the ramp and on the line. And I would see things change as you get through the middle of the organization. It starts to move, and then when you get to the bottom of the organization, you'll ask the question: what's more important, on time or safety? And everybody will say on time. And so, well, if the leaders are saying safety is number one, right? Why is the front line saying on time is more important than safety? And then you have to do that change management as you go all the way down on the line. And so it starts at the top, everybody buying in, and then as you go down to the middle of the organization, it changes. And then all of a sudden, you can start quantifying it, and you can say it's a controllable cost, safety. And why would you want to spend an extra $50, $60, $70 million a year when you can control that? And so I think that was the biggest challenge I had, was the change management, is first getting people to believe in the system.
Very good, thank you. And how does that different, Mike? How is it different with your new startup carrier versus the legacy carriers?
Being in a startup is absolutely wonderful because all those things we saw, we have 200 years of leadership at this new airline we're working on. And all those things we saw in a big organization, you can implement right at the beginning. For example, our manual system, it's all digital, all HTML, all linked. And so when you look at safety, so manuals drive training, training drives performance and safety. And so we have data visualization on the performance side using the SIAS and FOCA and all this data. We can tell you exactly where things are happening, not only on the ramp, on a piece of GSE equipment, on a belt buckle in an airplane. That's how detailed it is on visualization and getting all that data together. That then feeds into the manuals. And so how do we data visualize in the manuals? Well, we're seeing escapes here, and now we can look at chapter 18 of this manual and saying, chapter 18 is driving these escapes, or is it training that's driving the escapes, or is it leadership that's not performing the way they should be performed? And now you've got an organization that everybody looks at this data, and it's all linked. Manuals are linked to training, training is linked to performance and data visualization, and it goes back and forth. Data visualization and manual. I can look at a manual and say, chapter 18 is where my problem is. Go to chapter 18 and look exactly where things are happening. It's really, really exciting, and it's manifested itself in operational reliability, which everybody likes, and it manifests itself in lower costs.
Very good. That sounds like a fun time. Yeah, it really does. Nobuyo, you've worked for associations handling safety-related issues both at the mainline and the regional levels or carriers, including SMS rulemaking, being involved in CAS working groups, and establishing a SIAS, and making sure that the regionals and the mainlines have one level of safety. From a safety perspective, share with us your experience working with both mainline and regional carriers.
When I was at A4A, the SMS rulemaking began. I remember attending FAA's very first SMS workshop was held at the hotel next to Dallas Airport. I actually found the binder notebook from that workshop up in my office. But leading to that, industry really took the initiative to implement safety programs like voluntary safety program, ASAP and FOCWA. We realized blaming on the individual or their mistakes did not fix the problem. And somebody came up with a great idea of encouraging employees to report their mistakes voluntarily, so we all can learn from their mistakes and address any interrelated issues and fix the systems. And like Michael said, just culture was big theme then. And for those of you entering the safety world now, that you may not even think what just culture really means, because it just blended in the corporate culture. But it was a big deal. And it, like Peggy and both of them said, it took time and it took the right people at the right time to advance safety. And after that, the discussion began. How can we share this data was collected by individual companies? How can we share the data among ourselves and even government? And this was not simple, straightforward either. I remember my boss at the A4A at the time talking to individual airlines and presenting how beneficial this would be. And there was some resistance, even from the management. They were worried that there was a fear that sharing this data would, your airline name would end up in news headlines. But we made it through. And the reason why I'm saying this is that it did take a lot of effort to get here. What I'm leading up to this is that once all these programs are implemented and SMS became a requirement, I think it helped achieve one level of safety, whether you are a mainline carrier, or regional operator, low-cost carrier, any Part 121 or even Part 135 carriers, that we all strive to achieve excellent level of safety.
Could I just add something?
Sure.
Nobuyo, you remind me. So one of the big concerns was this issue of protection of data. And would we be able to, and how would we be able to? And if we couldn't, it would undermine all that we were trying to accomplish. And you just heard from a number of congressmen, several, I think both of whom were in Congress at the time. We actually got, FAA got congressional language to require protection for what was termed voluntarily provided information. So airlines that have FOCWA programs, that was not a requirement, still is not a regulatory requirement per se to have a FOCWA program. That is a voluntary program, and to the extent that data was shared with FAA, FAA was required by law to protect it. The same with employee reporting programs as well. So even the Congress I shouldn't say even the Congress. So Congress understood, as we all did. I think so, but Congressman Graves' point is really an important one. Very few people up on the Hill understand aviation as an industry and the technical needs of it. And even this idea of protecting information. Obviously, there's a downside to protecting information. You can hide things. Well, that wasn't what we wanted. We wanted to be able to honestly share real information that pointed to risk, that allowed us to then, as an industry, understand whether we could eliminate the risk, mitigate the risk, or how we were going to manage it. And to the extent the data now shows that's how we've used it, I think the protection that was provided was important and also good public policy. But to Nobuyo's point, until all of us could be assured that once we started giving this to one another, it wasn't going to somehow reflect negatively on someone or be used in a way that wasn't intended, we really wouldn't have made any progress. And the congressional protection was a big piece of allowing leaders then to be able to make the case within their airlines, within the union, within FAA, that going down this path of sharing information and finding out risks was really the next step to continuing to reduce our accident rate.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because what happens inside the walls of your airlines are happening outside the walls of your airline.
Mhm.
And we never share that information. So how many examples can we give
Right.
based on CAS of somebody raising their hand in the SIAS and saying, hey, my airline just had a EGPW event at this airport. And then when we started digging into the data, because we all share the data, we said more than one airline's had that same event. And what's driving it? Or misconfigured takeoffs, or wrong surface movements. All the things that we see as one-offs at an airline that I would say, oh, that's just a one-off. When you bring it into the system, you find out that it's not a one-off and that it's a system problem. And we solved a lot of problems like that at CAS and SIAS. It's one of the, I think, the highlights of my career was getting in a room with everybody and having those spirited discussions, because they were spirited at times, but we're all close colleagues, and we still contact each other to this day, and we always talk about what we solved in either in the hallway or in the room.
Very good.
Yeah.
So in addition to the importance of proprietary information or making sure that the data is protected, what other challenges do you see going forward with SIAS and CAST and SMS? And Peggy, we'll start with you.
Complacency.
No.
So here you are, the leaders of the regional airlines. I have to beg you to not become complacent. Many of you have probably never experienced a catastrophic failure. I can assure you most of the employees in your organizations have not. They're too young. There was a time when all of us experienced regular catastrophic failures, not every 3 weeks, but all the time. You don't want to go through it. You do not want your organization to go through it, because your organization will not exist within a year to 18 months after a major catastrophic failure. You will be bought out or merged or subsumed in some way, because your name will no longer be a name people will buy tickets and use. Those are just the realities of this industry. And your biggest risk going forward is assuming you are going to maintain the level of safety we have now without your daily commitment to safety. You must demonstrate that. Don't become complacent.
Well, I'll add to that, complacency. I would tell you that, you look at our industry, we fly 850 million passengers a year pre-COVID. We've flown 8 billion passengers, more than the population of the world, without a fatal commercial aviation hull loss. That's an amazing, amazing record. And I was spouting those off one day at a meeting, and somebody came up to me and said, Michael, that's a given. Don't even talk about that. That's a given. And I looked at this very senior leader and said, it's not a given. I mean, we work hard at this to get this done. And when people start thinking that it's a given that we flew more than the population of the world without a fatal hull loss, we all did. And if one of you all lose an airplane or I lose an airplane, we all lose an airplane. We just can't get complacent. If there's one thing I can say, can I get complacent? My CEO, Andrew Levy, was the on-site executive at ValueJet. And I couldn't have a better advocate in the world, because he lived through an accident. I've lived through 2 accidents, and I get teary-eyed when I talk about one of them. It's a horrible, horrible experience. If you've never been to an accident site, it's a horrible, horrible experience. The smell of jet fuel, the smell of burning, it's just horrible. And if there's one thing I could say, please don't get complacent. Don't think this just happens, because it doesn't.
Very good.
And that would be my answer too. But I would like to bring it full circle. I think that SMS help us avoid some of that. We have systems and procedures in place to address safety issues and maintain safety of operations. Therefore, I go back to the first point, that protecting data. I think data, especially the collected through voluntary programs, and there is so much trust built in over the years, and I cannot emphasize enough the protecting data and data source. That the data could become the thing of in the past when we lose it, and we can move on. But the trust that lose along with it, we cannot replace. It's hard to replace, or we cannot rebuild. And it's just not only between employees and management, it's also operators and a regulator. So we all strive to through maintain excellent level of safety, not only on individual levels or individual company levels, but aviation ecosystem as a whole. So that's the cornerstone.
Absolutely. And I'll say in my tenure in the industry that data protection has always been front and foremost and taken seriously by both the industry side as well as the US government side, with very little challenges through that. So thank you to Michael and Peggy for getting that started. Moving on to SMS. SMS is always an evolving system. Specifically for SMS, do you see an end state of this evolution at some point? Or if you had a crystal ball, where would you see future enhancements for SMS?
I'll let you start,
Um,
since you're still in the middle of it.
Yeah, I think the future of SMS is one that it's just assumed as part of the management structure and part of the management business that you talk about safety and its effect on the business, the effect on operational reliability, the same way you talk about everything else. I think when it gets subsumed into the business and that it's not, we're still talking about it as something outside rather than just being a part of put my left foot in front of my right foot when I'm walking, right? And I think that's where it needs to be. I do think that data is setting us up for a lot of other things like FOQA is being evolved into MOQA, Maintenance Operation Quality Assurance. And you say, well, what's that? How does that work? Well, if I can increase reliability on systems and do predictive component change outs, then the non-normal go away. Right? And think about what flying would be like when you have, which gives you operational reliability and things like that. So how do you link all of it together? I think is the next evolution of SMS.
Right, and I think this is, again, an area for your leadership, for you to really sort of fill those gaps that Mike just talked about. I think too often, everywhere, including at the FAA, there's a tendency to sort of turn to the safety guy for what's happening in SMS, or turn to the safety guy for what are you seeing in FOQA, or what are the employee programs telling us? When those are employees that are in your operating lines, and your operational folks need to know what those employees are telling you or what the FOQA data is telling you about your operations. So again, this is an opportunity for you as leaders to look at how do you integrate the safety management program, as Mike just described, more thoroughly throughout the organization. So it's not an add-on.
Yeah.
It's still an add-on now because it was a relatively recent rule, relatively recent requirement. You had to go back probably and redo some of the things you had done before to come into full compliance. But now it needs to be a regular part of how we operate within the aviation system, how FAA operates, how the manufacturers operate, which is the next sort of big challenge to get them all aligned on the SMS programs as well. But again, you as leaders at your own airlines can really be key in helping to accomplish that.
Yeah, I would say I present at every board meeting, and I have accountability and responsibility, but I had zero authority. And that's a horrible place to be, presented to a board, presenting numbers that I'm responsible for, that I'm accountable for, but I have zero authority on how to make it happen, because I had to be an influencer and convince my colleagues that the numbers that I'm putting up are your numbers and they're not my numbers. And thankfully, in the organizations I work with, I had some authority, but I see a lot of organizations where the safety person is just that person, and they're trying to constantly convince people of what other airlines are doing and what's the right thing to do and what we're hearing at CAST and what the SIS numbers are showing. Why aren't the safety enhancements being ingested into the system? And why aren't we looking at info and SAFOs and all the other stuff? And it gets tiring for a lot of them. I mean, we would see that, and it's a difficult place to be. So that would be my add-on to that.
And I think if we could see all the faces on Zoom right now, all the safety folks would be shaking their heads yes.
Really?
Yeah. And on the Regional Airline Association, where we have the safety council meetings, that's always a regular topic, right? We are assumed to have authority over that information and speak on behalf of the other operators and leaders of those departments, when really they're the driver for the information behind it. We just assist with gathering it and presenting it to them. Any tips on that, Michael, from United or Delta, and how to get more ownership from the leadership groups or operator operation leadership?
You just got to be able, it's that influence and skill you need to have. You know, I always talk about the 3 I's: identify, influence, and implement. If you identify a problem and influence it, when it comes time to implement, it's yours.
Yeah.
It's yours. And how do you influence that in the industry? But I would say showing them the value of what you're trying to do.
Mhm.
Everything's value driven. And if you can show the value, I mean, we have an obligation to send people home the same way they came to work. We have an obligation to our customers and passengers that when they walk off an airplane, it's the same airplane they walked on, right? I mean, that's our role. And you have to show the value of that, which leads back to the complacency side, that people don't think twice about getting on an airplane today.
Right.
They don't even think twice. I mean, you can't buy insurance in the airport anymore, right? I mean, because that's why it's just one of those things. And we got to be careful of that.
Very good. Peggy, why do you think the CAS model has been so successful? And do you see other similar programs in other countries?
I think it was successful because it worked, because we got technical folks together and we said to them, okay, using data, initially we used old accidents and looked at things that perhaps we hadn't fully addressed. Now we look at new data, data before we have an accident that helps us understand where our remaining risks are. We had fabulous technical people who came together and really did identify remaining risks that we hadn't fully addressed. And then we had senior folks at CAST and later at SIS who could make commitments for their individual airline, for their manufacturer, for their part of the industry, for labor, and who would, and at government, and say, yeah, okay, we see the risk and this is what we can do as an organization. I didn't say this is what you could do, Mike, at your airline. I said, this is what FAA can do, short of rulemaking, which we knew took too long and would not accomplish our goal by the end of the initial 10-year period. What could FAA do to influence how to reduce that risk? What could the airlines do? What was, and we all committed to what we would do. And then we had to report back to each other. And then we actually had to measure that we were effective. And when you can actually demonstrate that a process works, people are willing to stick with it. And yes, we have seen that it's been accepted in other parts of the world. Initially in South America, where we had and continue to have a higher accident rate, but it's a very committed safety community there. And they began looking at their own data and then looking at what safety enhancements we in the US had already committed to see if our actions would be helpful in addressing their risks. So they sort of started with a SIS first because they came to it much later than we did. And they analyzed their data that was not just accident data. They looked at our enhancements. They accepted some of those. They created some of their own. And it's been a very effective program as well. We've moved into Asia as well. And obviously Europe has many of the same programs. And we've been sharing information with the Europeans for a very long time. So while there are still challenges, Africa continues to be a challenge. I think what we've seen, again, we've been able to demonstrate it's a process that works. Don't create your own new one, refine it for what you need in your geographic area. There are obviously challenges in protecting data around the world and those kinds of things. So it does look different in some places, but overall the idea of getting technical folks to look at data, understand where your risks are and what can you do to address them is a pretty fundamental way to approach aviation safety. Mike, you've been in on those conversations as well.
Yeah, very. I've had the opportunity to speak over in Asia and Europe on behalf of CAST, and we had to move them from a blame culture to a culture of inclusion and understanding the data. I think that was the biggest challenge. I remember coming back from one particular meeting where one gentleman got in a conversation with the panel, and we're talking about just culture. And I jokingly said, we need to set our watches back 30 years. Yeah, I mean, you know, this is, you know, you're talking like this is 1970 now, and it's look what we've done with data and the free flow of data. The best example I can give you is was right before the holidays. Remember, we were at an SIS meeting, and we saw a spike in misconfigured takeoffs, right? Attempts and takeoffs. And within 3 days, we have it solved. Not solved, but if you had to do a rulemaking, right? I mean, think about a rulemaking, we'd still be talking about it. But within 3 days, we had, because of that meeting and because everybody in that meeting looked at the data and looked at it the same way, within 3 days, a SAFO came out right before the Thanksgiving holidays.
Yeah.
And that is a classic example. And I could tell you another 10 more of how that happened on different things that we all worked through very diligently that nobody even knows it happened. We can't publicize it for a lot of reasons, but that's the kind of work that went on behind the scenes with the support of everybody, because Nobuyo's at those meetings. You know, we're all at those meetings and advocating for the same thing.
That's an impressive timeline to be able to get that out.
John did a heck of a job for that, right?
He did.
Yeah.
Right. And again, I mean, what we knew is when you share information with the safety community, they're going to react.
Yeah.
You can't know something and not do something.
Right.
And you can't have heard it and pretend you don't know. So, I mean, all of those are parts of why this has been so successful. Once you know, you've got to do something. That's what we do as safety professionals.
And it all started with one airline said, "Hey, I had an event. Has anybody seen the same thing?" And being able to openly and honestly say, and admittedly say, "I had an event." And the next thing you know, we all looked at it and we all seemed like we had events.
Right.
And it was a larger issue than you could ever imagine. And that we were able to solve it.
Very good. Switching over to COVID a bit. Michael, you were the industry co-chair at CAS when the pandemic started. I remember seeing some risk documents and checklists that CAS provided for both continuing and resuming operations. How do you think these documents contributed to the resuming of operations within the industry and operating safely?
You know, we one of the things we advocated for was enhanced oversight. When you're in a wind down or a wind up, a quick wind up or a quick wind down, whether it was post 9/11, post bankruptcy, the FAA usually comes in and gives you enhanced oversight. And so we had an industry that was in a rapid wind down. People were not flying, people were changing seats. There were concerns about their professional lives, their personal lives, their financial lives. And all that was coming together to create what we all thought that CAS was a perfect storm in a negative way. And so we decided to adopt an enhanced oversight of what all the airlines were seeing, aggregated together because we're all seeing the same thing. And how are you going to, each airline will address it differently, but this document outlined eight, I believe it was 8 or 9 different areas, including air traffic control, because they were having the same problem. And we all came together and had this enhanced oversight document. The next thing we did was I was on the strategy committee for Star Alliance, and then my colleagues were on. One was on One World and one was on Star. And Sky. And so we pushed it out to the alliances. And then the next thing you know, it got pushed out to the rest of the world. I mean, Ali Brahmi pushed it out to his colleagues. And this document became a worldwide document on how to manage through a downturn, a wind down and a wind up. And I think we did pretty well. I mean, the truth is about to hit here because everybody's starting to move into new seats and everybody's starting to upgrade, and the regionals have their issues with the pilot shortage. So we still got to keep a close eye on the ball.
Very good, thank you. Along with the CAS checklist, the FAA and the U.S. government had other documents that were published. And working with Nobuyo and through the Safety Council at the RAA and the Safety Committee, we met several times during the pandemic, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly, and really found that those meetings were helpful. We shared a lot of information, how we were going to deal with all of the information that was coming to us and all of the new requirements. How do you feel like those efforts were in mitigating the health and safety risk? And what's the best practice to set those up and discuss those going forward?
First of all, thank you, Julie, and other Safety Council members who are hopefully watching over Zoom. Appreciate for participating in those meetings. And for me and RAA, it has been very productive and beneficial to understand what our members are doing and how we're handling the constantly emerging threats and the risks. We use SurveyMonkey or Hot Button for real-time quick feedback from our members. that has been very beneficial. And I have to say, I think just like, just to tag along with what Michael was saying, I think members do appreciate each other for sharing best practices and addressing concerns or challenges. I think that industry has this one golden rule that we never compete on safety. And the safety council, our safety council is the manifestation of this, and similar to FOA safety council, and this contribute to high level of safety.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to an issue that's near and dear to all of our hearts, and we've talked about the last 2 days, is hiring and retaining talent. What do you think the concerns for hiring and retaining talent and best practices to ensure the integrity and the future of the safety programs at our airlines and at the FAA? Peggy, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a challenging time for these. I think we've all seen the initiatives. I know many of the airlines have initiatives. Sorry about that. So, right, I mean, clearly there are challenges in identifying and maintaining the kind of talent that we need to go forward. But I think there are a lot of initiatives underway. I think we've all seen where many of the airlines have created agreements now with different universities to try to demonstrate or to show to students that there is a career path here, despite some of the difficult challenges, including getting sufficient hours in order to qualify to be an airline transport pilot. But to also, I think we need to look at those same kind of programs when we look toward maintenance and other technical or technical groups, whether it's with colleges or technical schools. I think young people need to see that there is a career path that makes sense to them, that supports the investment they're making in their education in order to give themselves a career going forward. I'm a part of the Laura Tabor Barber Air Safety Foundation. Some of you may be familiar with it. And we've recently, within the last 3 or 4 years, started a scholarship program to, again, support students who are making a commitment to aviation safety as part of their career and trying to make it a little easier for them to accomplish those goals through their education. And now we're adding mentoring and a kind of networking concept so that students who receive the scholarships can also find people within the industry who can help support them as they try to move forward. But it is a challenging time, I guess, for this industry. And I think it will be for quite a while. I know, Mike, you've been a part of a number of those kinds of initiatives, trying to identify ways to first incentivize people into the industry and then help them down that path. So you may have some ideas.
Yeah, regarding the flying side, I've always said it's not only it's not a technical skill. I mean, to hire a good captain, you know, you're giving them a $100 million airplane that generates all this revenue every day, and if it crashes, it's going to cost you between $1 billion and $1.7 billion. And is that a technical skill? Now, that's a leadership skill. So how do you bring somebody in, identify them really early on, even as early as preschool, K through 8, and identify somebody and look for the attributes you need to look for to be not only a strong leader, but to have those technical skills that brings people into our industry, whether it's being an engineer or being a manufacturer or maintenance technician or a pilot or anything else. And how do we do that? We have to prime the pump. What I'm seeing today and what I saw at my prior airline, United, is that people are free agents and they go after shiny objects. And they're constantly moving left and right, and they don't stay in a career path. I mean, you move back and forth in a career path to gain that experience, especially you know, when you look at operations, as operations is training, it's safety. There's a lot of elements to operations, but they just go after shiny objects without having that 3, 5, and 10-year plan. And how do you get somebody on a track and say, you know, you could be the vice president one day, but this is the gap and this is how you need to fill it. And these are the attributes we need to do. And how do you cultivate that in an organization? Because it's not only about money. I mean, you know, it's it's not about money. It's about having a decent career path going up. There's money at the bottom end of it, but I think once you're in the organization, it's about leadership and a career path.
Yeah, obviously the training is important, but I would like to add that one thing that we are learning from COVID or reminded of this is that we cannot succeed without addressing human element. By what I mean by this is that we all go through life event and we have stresses in our lives, and I think that the distraction comes from this stress is far more influential than experience of somebody causing accident or incident. So it's really important to take a holistic approach and humanistic approach.
Yeah, I think we need to change how we think about all of this. You know, when you look at certification issues for being a pilot, for example, they're 1960s, the rules were made. And if we looked at 1970 when the 7.4 was coming online, and we said we're going to use 1910 rules to have pilots fly 747s, we all laugh. And here it is 60 years later after those rules were made, and we're still using 1960s, late 50s rules on how to certify pilots, how to certify technicians, and we really need to take a holistic approach at this. And you know, Peggy and I have had this conversation. The first time I landed on an aircraft carrier solo, I had 105 hours. My first actual mission off the USS Midway in the Sea of Japan, I had 330 hours. And I aerial refueled at night, came back and landed. So this is not an hours-based discussion.
Yeah.
Right.
This is about, you know, selection, training, and oversight. How do you select the right person? How do you train them, right? And then how do you have that oversight to make sure that they're doing what they're doing, because it's an absentee workforce, and that's through data, and that's through FOCA, that's through SMS. And so you see, it's all connected.
Right.
And I mean, that's just my opinion. I know the 1,500-hour rule is a tough rule, but to me, I look at it as 1,500 one-hour flights or 1,500 hours worth of experience. What are you looking for? And it's a different discussion when you think about a military pilot, I guess. But there's a lot more people out there who can be military pilots than went to civilian route.
And I would fly with you any day, Michael.
Well, thank you.
All right, last question for the panel. What are you most hopeful about regarding the future of aviation safety?
Well, I think technology is our friend in this case. It can only help us do better. The more we can know about what's going on before we have a catastrophic failure or any kind of failure, the better off we all are. And I think we've seen that we can do that. And I think we'll see that technology will only help us do that better and better. I know, Mike, you've started a number of initiatives, First at United, and I'm sure you've taken them to your new airline as well. Really capitalizing on what it is you can know about what's going on out there. And then we need to bring the people along. They need to feel that the data is honest, that it's accurate, that it's not going to get them in trouble. I mean, all of those kinds of things, again, we need to continue to be committed to. But I think technology has done an amazing job so far and can only help us continue down this path.
Yeah, and technology is outpacing rulemaking in a lot of ways,
Oh,
right? And so how do you work through the ASIS program and the CAS program to capture the data? I mean, think about how exciting this is. Vertical takeoff vehicles, spaceports 15 miles east of Denver International Airport. You know, how are you going to integrate all this airspace into the future? And it's an exciting time, but we need data and we need influencers to make sure that whatever the outcome is going to be, it works for everybody. Not that the people are blockers, but they're influencers to influence and bring the issues to the table. But it's an exciting time, but it's going to be a lot of work.
Right. You know, if I may, I know, Nobuyo, I know you have thoughts too, but you raised something that's important. So there are a lot of new entrants, as we've called them, coming into the industry, and they do not have the experience that you all have of having grown up in a safety culture and in an expectation that that's kind of the #1 concern. If any of you have had any interactions with some of the technology companies that are bringing unmanned vehicles into the system, or some of the others, I had a very interesting conversation some years ago with a senior vice president from Amazon. At the time, FAA, it was said FAA did not allow you to read your Kindle from once you started the approach. First of all, it was not an FAA thing. It was up to the airlines to demonstrate that the Kindles, 200 of them in the back, didn't interfere with their systems, be that as it may. We put together a nice little group to look at how we might address that issue. And the senior VP from Amazon, who was not a big fan of the FAA, when we started, actually scheduled time to come and meet me one day and came into my office and said, I got to tell you, your people at FAA know a hell of a lot about how airplanes operate.
Shocking.
I said, yeah, most of the folks in our industry actually know a lot about it. He's like, yeah, no, I saw that too at this committee you put together. It's really amazing. Because in his industry, they didn't really share information. They didn't talk to one another, and they really didn't care, because if something didn't work 6 months later, they would send you a patch. It would fix it for another 6 months. And a year later, you had to buy the next one anyway. And that was how they operated. And that was kind of the attitude they brought now into, once Amazon and others moved into areas with unmanned vehicles. They think differently because they are different. They didn't come from where you've come from. And so it's a challenge. And to Mike's point, we need to be influencing how they come into our industry. They need to understand they're coming into a national airspace system. Most of them didn't even know one existed. I have a feeling most of your mothers and daughters and cousins and brothers don't either, because they aren't a part of the system. But it is very important, as these new challenges come into our system, that all of us, all of you, are playing that leadership role in making sure they understand their safety responsibility to you, and that you understand your safety responsibility to them. I'm sorry, Nobuyo.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I think I feel like we feel lucky because we have an SMS which has continuous improvement built in it. We're always looking way to improve safety and mitigate risks and measure the effectiveness of risks. And like Peggy said, I think we have to continue to strive to achieve perfect balance of current and new technology and human element.
Very good, thank you. Hey, do we have time for questions, or are we out of time? Okay, fair. Yeah, I'll just close it out. And
Yes, we're gonna close it out. But we so appreciate you, Julie and Peggy, Nobuyo and Michael. The work that you all are doing is profoundly important. Please keep doing it. Please keep including us. We will keep participating. We really appreciate you, and we appreciate your comments. So please join me in thanking our panel for that excellent session. Okay, brief remarks, because we've kept you so far after our close, and we appreciate it, but this panel was well worth sticking around for. Before we close, I do want to thank our chairman, Dean Flannery, and our presenting sponsors, GE, MHIRJ, and Embraer, along with every sponsor that helped us make this event possible. And I do want to thank my colleagues to help put this show together. Sharon, Drew, Nobuyo, Bill, Michelle, and our outside team of stars, Diana, Sarah, Michaela, and Riley. We could not have done this without them. Most of all, I want to thank each of you for being here. Like I said at the beginning, we're a family, and it was important to be here together. And for those of you who are participating by Zoom, thank you for being with us that way. This in-person event was a long time coming. I hope you thought it was worth the wait. I certainly did. And with that, the first RAA Leaders Conference is a wrap. Thank you.